Welcome, everybody. I'm Jennifer Rivlin, and you are with Women Leading Fearlessly, where experts help us axe our anxiety, say pass to perfectionism, and become more confident leaders. Today, we are so lucky to have with us Jessica Bronzert. Jessica, welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Jessica Bronzert is an executive coach and a change consultant and the founder of the Sparks Group. Jessica's passion is helping leaders and teams develop their capacity, not just the skills they need to be personally and professionally successful in the face of ever increasing change and complexity. Motivated by the diversity of the human experience and organizational life, Jessica employs her MBA, specialized change and coach training, and years of corporate and nonprofit experience to help clients make the changes that make a difference to them and in the world. Welcome, Jessica. Thank you
Hi,
for
thanks.
being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm so excited to speak to you today about vertical development because that's your specialty. So I want us to start just explaining to our viewers what is vertical development.
Yeah, it's a great place to start because most people have never heard of vertical development before. It's also known as adult development. So sometimes you'll hear adult and vertical interchangeably. And the basic gist of the idea of vertical development is that psychologists used to believe for a long time that our meaning making, which is something we're very comfortable talking about with children, that it really stopped by the time we were 18 or 21. So think about a baby. If you hide the rattle behind your back, the baby does not have the maturity of mind to understand that the rattle still exists. Mm-hmm. We often talk about teenagers and how they are a little bit more prone to take risks, but they sort of eventually outgrow that behavior. Psychologists used to think that by the time you were 18 or 21, you were, sort of psychologically as developed as you were going to be. And in the last 40 or 50 years, psychologists have said, really, that's not the case. We don't believe that's the case anymore, that there are stages of development that adults go through. And we call that vertical development. And we contrast that with what we think of as horizontal development. Think of horizontal development as adding a skill to my toolkit. And vertical development is maybe growing my capacity. So the great analogy, the easy way to understand it is a smartphone, if you will. I can add apps to this phone all day long. Think of that as adding skills, right? Think of that as horizontal development. I can get the phone to be a flashlight, a calculator, so on and so forth. But unless I upgrade the operating system on the phone, eventually the phone is going to not work as well, right? And maybe even stop working. And so we think of the human operating system as vertical development.
I love that analogy. That is so clear. It's incredible. So, what are there different stages of vertical development, and how does that relate to, and like, what does an upgrade of our operating system look like in a human being?
Yeah, well, there are, psychologists again have outlined, depending on who you're looking at, different stages of vertical development. So there's a few different models out there, but they kind of coalesce around some similar ideas. And upgrading your vertical development looks like being able to see more, as it were, being able to handle more complexity, more, maybe more volume of what's going on in the world. Think of it as being able to get on the balcony and look down at the situation that you're in and seeing it from a higher level and being able to, get a different view on it. So that's the general idea of what it means to grow vertically versus horizontally. And that's really important. The idea of vertical development is important because we have typically taken a pretty horizontal view towards leadership development, right? We talk a lot about competencies. We talk a lot about skills. And not to say that those things are not important. They're super important. But we're not putting as much attention on this idea of vertical growth. And what we know is that the rate of change in the world and the amount of complexity that's coming at us is just getting more, right? There's actually lots of research supporting that.
Yes.
And vertical development is the antidote to that, right? We want to be able to meet that increasing rate of change and that increasing rate of complexity with the ability to see more and to navigate more effectively at those increasing levels of complexity.
Yes. Okay. So our competencies, that's a hard word to say, and skills are our apps on the phone. And let's even dive even a little bit deeper in terms of what does it mean, like paint a picture for our audience about what would a highly vertically developed leader be able to do. I understand they'd be able to have the perspective, as you explained, like looking down at the balcony, and like what else? What are some other things that you work on with clients?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. So some of the things that we want to see come online as people grow vertically are teamwork.
Okay.
Right. So earlier in our meaning making, we very much are sort of the instrument of having the answer and being the expert, and maybe getting all the work done. Right. So things that corporate American leadership, that organizations actually really value a lot and are valuable. Right. I'm an expert in my field and I'm able to solve problems. And I'm able to get a lot of work done. Right. We talk a lot about, burnout and running really hard in our careers. Unfortunately, even those things are inherently valuable, they are inversely correlated with being able to achieve transformational change. So that's a pretty high bar, transformational change, achieving it and sustaining it. But what we know is that when you grow vertically and you're able to navigate that complexity, you're able to better find, I'm going to call it solutions that are sort of 1 + 1 is greater than 2.
Okay.
Not sort of, certainly trade-offs are always sometimes necessary, but when you can see more and you're able to navigate more effectively, you are able to take into consideration and find solutions that meet the needs of more stakeholders more effectively. And you begin to bring online not just what's good maybe for me or what's good for my team or what's good for my boss, but what's good for the organization, what's good for society, where do we want to be further and further out into the future, and how do we make decisions now that are in support of that long-term vision. That ability to see forward in time is also something that comes on board as we grow vertically.
Wow. So Jessica, what are some of the stages in vertical development?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are many stages of development, but I'll focus on the ones that most adults fall into.
Okay.
There are 2 stages commonly that about 80% of the adult population sits in. And just as background, we think about your center of gravity of where you make meaning most of the time, but most of us are sort of spanning several stages of adult development. So that said, the 2 stages that most of us are sitting in most of the time, the first one is called, depending on the model you look at, either expert or skill-centric is another name for it.
Okay.
And this way of looking at the world is very, sort of implied by the name expert, is that I am pretty identified with my expertise, my body of knowledge that I've either learned in school or learned on the job. And I solve problems with that expertise. And early in my career, I'm getting promoted based on that expertise. We value this mindset, right, of I'm a deep subject matter expert and I can solve problems in my domain. We value that highly in organizations, right? I mean, lots of professions need deep knowledge.
Yeah.
So huge amount of value. However, the limitations of that way of looking at the world is that it's pretty individual, right? So when I think I'm the smartest person in the room, it can be hard for me to tap into the wisdom of other people and to collaborate with other people to get the work done.
Okay.
And then, so pros and cons with every stage, there's pros and cons. That's the expert or the skill-centric stage. Next stage that comes after that, and this is a linear model, by the way, right? A lot of times we look at it and we go, well, I just want to jump to the end. But as human beings, we cannot skip stages.
Jump to the end. Okay.
We can't do that, unfortunately. It would be nice. But the next stage that we come to is called the achiever stage or self-determining stage. And this one is really where the productivity kind of comes online. So we get very dialed into getting things done. We become very identified with sort of our workaholism. And again, highly valued, right? Highly valuable to be able to get a lot of work done and to achieve outcomes.
Yes.
Better at teamwork at this stage starts to come online because we realize that we're not the smartest person in the room, or that other people actually
Through
bring things.
shared wisdom. Yeah.
Shared wisdom helps us get to the outcomes we want more effectively than if I'm the sole answer to things. However, what's very common at this stage is burnout,
Okay.
right? That we run and we run and we run. And
Yeah, been there.
yeah, exactly. I mean, ask the question, right? How many of us watching this have been there? I don't think, pretty much everybody is going to raise their hand. And so it is great to be able to get a lot of work done and to be identified with that as sort of our, who we are. But it can, we're not really designed to run that way as human beings. And it's not a super sustainable way to be in your life or be in your career. And so that realization then can kind of, invite us to grow vertically some more, to begin to look at things a different way.
And so then what's after achiever?
Yeah, well, there's this big shift from sort of a group, the expert and achiever stages that are before that, to what we call those sort of the conventional stages of meaning making, into the post-conventional stages of meaning making. And the first stage in that second group is called individualist or self-questioning, where a little bit can feel a little bit like midlife crisis, potentially. It's not always correlated to age, but it can be a sort of a coming undone of everything that you've ever known. So I talk a little bit about how those conventional stages are outside in, right? I'm very dialed into what other people expect of me and what conventional success looks like. And as you transition to these later stages of development, you're able to center a little bit more into what's important to you. And so that stage after achiever, that individualist or self-questioning stage, is a lot more about what are my values, and sort of taking apart all of the things that we've believed about our life and how we've constructed our life and our work up to that point. And really questioning, is this how I want it to be? Is this the only way it can be? Is there another way? That's a pretty significant shift from a meaning making point of view, but it's huge. It really opens up the door to a lot of growth, but it can take a long time, and it can be pretty uncomfortable, right? They're not going to lie about that's not a cakewalk. But it's the doorway. It's a doorway.
And then what's the final stage, or is there a final stage?
Well, there are actually, a number of stages even past that. What we know from a research perspective is that only about 20% of the adult population makes the move from that achiever self-determining stage into those later stages of development. And so once you get past that individualist self-questioning stage, it's a very small number of adults. So think about people like Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, right? Some of these, and you don't have to be famous or be affecting massive societal change to be at a later stage. But when you think about the people, some names that people might know, I would suspect actually Oprah Winfrey is a good modern day example of somebody who is probably at a later stage of development, even though she's very commercially successful in a traditional sense. If you listen to some of how she thinks, and certainly her Super Soul Sunday kind of work is gets very spiritual out there, whatever that might look like for somebody, and very much sort of challenging the conventional ways of being, right? That's a little bit what that might look like.
So people who are like beyond what society prescribed for them and are very comfortable in it.
Yes.
And are able to bring their gifts to the world in an unencumbered way. I mean, that's how I would see Oprah Winfrey, is that she is fearless. Well, it's a good,
yeah,
good
right?
right? Fearless in terms of like, she is going to figure out what passion and she has, and how that meets with a need that might be out there, and then create something.
Exactly, right. And very very interested. There's probably no single truth for Oprah Winfrey, right? So we would think of that as like the answer, or the construct, or is constantly evolving and constantly transforming, and everything is sort of fluid and dynamic all the time. And that, can be very unsettling, and it can also be really wonderful.
Freeing.
freeing.
So if somebody has progressed up these vertical development stages, do they switch between levels, or do you stay at a particular level, or at other could there be events in their lives which bring them to a different level?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We have a center of gravity, as I mentioned, where we might be making meaning from most of the time. And then we hopefully have some flexibility across stages. We should still have access to everything that came before us. And then we might occasionally be able to reach a little bit ahead of us in certain situations. And certainly, we joke, anyone goes home for Christmas and they feel like they fall back into the pattern of how they are, how they are with their families. So we can, sort of go backwards, if you will. You could regress if you have a pattern of being in a certain situation, or if you experience a really difficult period of your life, something traumatic happens, you might actually regress for a period of time. But we would still see you as having the capacity, where you were before. That's just not where your center of gravity is at the moment, if that makes sense.
It does. Could you just share with us like the name for the highest level? Like, is it nirvana or enlightened or something like that?
Magician. Unitive. Yeah. This sort of, yes.
Wow.
It's,
wow. I'm sure that anybody listening to the show is immediately very intrigued. I know.
Right. Yeah. It's this, or self-transforming, another way of thinking about it, depending on the model you're looking at. There are different names for it, but it is this, sort of almost magical ability to, and a sort of a sense of, I'm not there, so I don't know what it is like to be at that stage. But as I understand it intellectually, it is maybe a sense of oneness with the universe, right? A sense of being fully embedded in and connected to everybody and everything in the world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Kind of cool.
Yeah. Thank
you.
So
I think I love this topic, and for me, it has been the biggest lever in my own development to understand what these stages are, and then understand where I am at any given point in time, and to understand what it would look like to grow. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have with current leadership development efforts, is that we don't actually have a good picture of what it looks like to grow. What does it look like at the next stage? What does it look like to take the next step? Instead, we get this list of competencies. Again, they're not bad, but they just don't really paint the whole picture of what it looks like to grow as a human being. So for me, this really, completes the puzzle, or at least adds significantly to it. And it's an important framework that anybody who wants to lead fearlessly should be interested in, right?
Absolutely. Wow. So can we talk about the relationship between vertical development and emotion? And obviously the show is called Women Leading Fearlessly. Does fear play into this, and emotional intelligence? Can we connect
Absolutely.
those? Okay.
Yeah. So I think sometimes emotional intelligence and vertical development can sort of be, I think they are part and parcel of one another, or emotional intelligence is a concept that fits inside vertical development, because as we grow vertically, we are better able to understand and take the perspective of the other people involved in our work. And so fear, absolutely, that's part of the human experience.
Yes.
What we would say is that at maybe earlier stages of adult development or vertical development, I very much am subject to my fear. I'm attached to my fear. My worry about what other people think about me, or my worry about my place in the world, may very much be driven from the outside. What does my family think? What does my boss think? What do my peers think? May drive the fear in me.
Yeah.
And as we grow, we're able to put a little bit of space in between all of those outside perspectives and what we really think in our heart, what our values are. And so that's something, when I'm working with clients on this, that I'm trying to cultivate is, okay, we know what this person thinks and that person thinks. Let's try and get really centered with what you want, what you value, and what does that decision look like? And then let's manage, manage the implication to all these other stakeholders. And let's look at what's possible. But how do we help people get centered in their own truth and not worry quite as much about the outside influences, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So is there a way for someone like me or any of our viewers to find out where they are in this vertical development schema?
Yeah, there are a few different ways. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
There are a few different ways to go after it, depending on, sort of what your, level of interest is in it. There is, and it's actually in the handout that I think we're going to talk about, but there's a framework for vertical development that you'll be able to get as part of this program, where you can sort of take a look at the different stages
Awesome.
and take a guess at where you are. There are also a couple different ways really to get a measurement of where you are. You would probably need to partner with a coach in order to, access those tools. But there are ways to measure one's stage of vertical development directly and in a sort of in an approximate kind of a way.
That's so cool. I can't wait to do it.
Yeah.
So the question that I ask all of my guests is, because we are all working on personal development and trying to become better people. And you are obviously an expert in this area of vertical development, which involves being, higher emotional intelligence, and emotional management comes along with that. Does fear still come up for you? And what are some of your favorite techniques for helping yourself be aware, utilize, manage, or let go of fear?
Yeah, so absolutely, fear still comes up for me. I am human, therefore I have fear. But I think I use the technique that I suggested a minute ago quite a lot, which is to try and get centered and understand what my perspective is, what my, what it is
What
that
your
I
truth
want,
is.
what my own truth is, and then secondarily to navigate, navigate the implications of that, where the fear may be coming from. I'm also a big fan of the, what scares you is the thing that you must do. I know there's a more elegant way of saying that, but I've sort of lived my life, and the thing that I'm most scared of is the thing that I need to try, right? Or I need to give it a shot and not let
That's
that.
where your edge is.
Yeah, obviously there's something about that when the fear comes up. And so to kind of elbow the fear aside and give it a try. And sometimes the answer is that's still really scary, and I might not, okay, maybe I don't want to do that again. But more often than not, the answer is that wasn't so bad. And
That wasn't so bad. Yeah.
and some really great things came out of that. And I learned.
Yeah. And you're going to get better the next time you do it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. So, Jessica, why don't you let us know about, you mentioned there's a tool, and let us know exactly that is and how we can get it, because that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so this is a kind of a complicated concept to understand. I think in a very short period of time, we've scratched the surface about what it is. But it's a handout, two-sided handout that really talks about why vertical development is important, because of the complexity and the change in the world. What it is, helping understand that distinction between horizontal and vertical development. And then the framework, one of the frameworks that's available, so that people can kind of go, okay, here's what it looks like. And then the pros and cons, what are the advantages and maybe some of the limitations of each of the stages, so that you can become a little bit more educated about this for yourself.
Wonderful. I can't wait to do it myself, truly, Jessica. All right. Well, thank you so much for being part of Women Leading Fearlessly, Jessica. It was so nice to connect with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Okay, we're done.
Ah.